This afternoon, we're going to present a little bit about what teamwork and intercultural learning can look like in a STEM classroom and specifically a cybersecurity classroom. So when talking about these kind of things, I think context is important in terms of where we are coming from. So to give you some context, I need to talk a little bit about myself and a little bit of bio. So my background is very much in STEM. It's in compute. My undergraduate degree was a bachelor's in technology in computer science and engineering. It's about as horrible as it sounds. It's all the computer science stuff, higher order math, and most of those things haven't used since I graduated, at least the math stuff. But it builds character. And it also gave me a solid foundation for the things that I ended up doing in my career so far. So not long after graduating, I ended up working for Accenture, initially as a programmer and then subsequently as a business analyst. Had about 2.5 years there before coming to Purdue for what was initially supposed to be a master's degree. And then, I kind of figured I like school way too much, so I'm going to stick around and do a whole PhD. And my first job out of grad school here was an assistant professor position at Kansas State University. But not long into my stay there, Purdue kind of came calling, and you don't say no when Purdue calls, or at least you entertain the option. And not long after, I was back. And also, I need to mention that during my stint in grad school doing my PhD, I did do internships in industry, which was at Hub International Discovery Communication, just to kind of keep a finger on the pulse of what's going on there, so that things I talk about with my students are relevant. So in some ways, I can almost draw I can split my life in before Purdue and after Purdue in some ways, and a lot of that influence how I conduct myself in the classroom and how I engage with students with regard to, well, being an international student myself, integrating into culture here. How am I equipping students to deal with that? So I'm going to take a brief pause as we go to the next slide. I'm going to let Dr. Jaiswal introduce herself as well.
Hello, everyone. I am Aparajita Jaiswal. Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you, Paul, for introducing me a little bit. So Tatiana has talked a lot about my research. So here is something about my academic and professional life. So I completed my bachelor's in management, concentrated on a STEM discipline because my bachelor's in management was in operation research. I did my master's in management. I worked in industry as senior manager operation research for 4 years. And I worked with a lot of data sets. And at that point of time, I'm a very data-driven person. And at that point of time, I realized that people face difficulties when it comes to analyzing data, and they refrain from that. And that is where I thought that, okay, I want to do something and I want to understand how data science education is imparted to the students. And that's how I joined Purdue in 2018 as a PhD student. And my dissertation focused on developing, understanding how students understand data science concept and how do they engage with data sets. So that was a part of my PhD. And then in 2019, while I was a grad student at Purdue, a major shift happened in my life because I met a very unique team, which was the Office of Globalization, and I worked as a GA for them and the TA for the Tech 330 course. That helped me to understand a lot more things about culture. To be very honest, I was an international student when I came here in 2018, and for me, coming to the US, the only thing that I knew was if you know English, you can survive. And that's what I thought when I came here. I didn't have any idea that how cultural differences, how cultures are different, how one country is different from other. And there are so many things that you need to understand. So yeah, I learned a lot over this period of time, and I'm very thankful to my position as a GA and the TA for Tech 330 and Office of Globalization, because that helped me to actually think my career in a different way. So I graduated with my PhD in 2022, and I started working as a postdoc for CILMAR. And CILMAR was another break for me to understand these these concepts very well. So I think, yeah, right now I'm on my intercultural journey and I'm progressing day by day. Right now I work as a intercultural research specialist for CILMAR, and my major one of the things that I do as a researcher is I try to integrate intercultural concepts into the STEM, because I myself come from a STEM background, and you will see that evidence in this particular presentation. So thank you. So Paul, you can take it.
A little more of backstory. As you know, graduation didn't happen unless you have pictures to prove it. So there's proof. And also, Aparajita and I both share an advisor. We were both in the same research lab with Dr. Alejandra Magana and her Rocket Ed group. So that's actually where we first met. And it's also kind of funny for me, where she was my boss for good part of 4 years, and now her office is like 2 doors down from where I'm at right now. So it's a little surreal. But the picture on the top right is a conference we all presented at recently. And I also owe a great deal to Dr. Magana in terms of introducing me to research that's set in an educational space and the scholarship of teaching and learning. One of the best things to happen from an academic standpoint and from a scholarship standpoint was that she put me to work with Aparajita and one of our other colleagues, Tugba. And yeah, it's been a solid 4 years ever since, working on all sorts of different types of papers: intercultural competence, simulations, team effectiveness, and all aligns with what I like to do in the classroom as well. So one thing we both mentioned right now is the reality that when we came here, we were international students. And the notion of culture, we all are a product of our lived experiences, and words have meaning, words have power. So over the years, it forced me to reflect on what exactly did culture mean to me, whether it's changed. Also, based on my own experiences as an international student, granted I was a grad student, I still needed to think about my own students and how equipped they were to be successful in a multicultural or intercultural environment, and what steps can I take to help them to be successful. I work in the Department of Computer and Information Technology, and outside of a few specific scenarios, it is almost always the case that you are going to end up in a workplace where the culture is not homogenous. You'll have people from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, speaking different languages, different communication styles. And well, I tell my students this, that, 95% of you will not get to pick your coworkers. The 5% of you might start your own companies and you can hire whoever you want, but the rest of you, you're walking into an organization, you kind of have to work with who's there, at least for some time. And you have to work well and work effectively. Now, trying to make this sales pitch to a classroom of 180 freshmen who all they want to learn is about the technical aspects of cybersecurity, it's been difficult. It's been challenging. So that was something else I had to wrestle with in terms of, okay, how can I demonstrate the utility of possessing intercultural competence, the ability to work effectively and efficiently in a workplace with people from diverse cultures different from your own, right? So that kind of served as the guiding motivation. That's what drove us and drove me specifically to exploring this area. And the reality is that the ability to work effectively in a diverse team, and you can quantify or qualify diverse however you want, that is an expectation from graduates of STEM programs. However, this is juxtaposed with the reality that STEM graduates tend to find it rather challenging to work in an environment that is diverse. Now, some of this is related to just demographics that exist in STEM programs. So this is kind of reflective of what we see in a typical CIT classroom, predominantly male, and some of it can also be attributed to the land-grant nature of Purdue University, that a good percentage of our students are white, with a smattering of other ethnicities in there. STEM curriculum tends to be focused on the technical skills. And that's important. I do not want to diminish that. Ultimately, the work you do is related to the technical skills and competencies that you possess. However, it's seldom the case that you're going to be working as a lone ranger on these things. But these demographics also make it difficult at times for students to, well, experience diversity, but college is probably the best place they're going to get it. So with that said, literature, surveys, white papers, inspirational LinkedIn posts all point to working in multicultural environments and multicultural teams to be basically non-negotiable. And as such, educational institutions have responded to this call, to this need, to this demand by encouraging faculty to introduce teamwork and the concepts of intercultural competence to their students, to their learners. But this is
always have.
well, it's not been without challenges.
I don't know if it's
There have
route or something like.
Maybe, yeah.
or let's say, yeah, there has been challenges. One, just a reluctance of faculty members to get involved in this. Technical stuff is hard enough. Oh, you want to talk about soft skills and cultures and all of that. So there, while the body of literature, body of knowledge is growing, there is still a relative dearth, so to say, which explores the intersection of intercultural competence and engineering or just STEM in general. So our goals were simply as follows. We wanted to integrate intercultural competence, the concepts behind it, into a large STEM classroom. And fortunately, or unfortunately, whichever side you fall on, I happen to have the opportunity to work with 180 cybersecurity freshmen every year. Well, that's just fall semester. So if you count spring also, that number increases substantially. And given the class size, it's also a great avenue to get them comfortable or familiar working in teams and introducing them to the notion of, hey, there are benefits to getting good at this. It's not without challenges, but should you be able to navigate these waters, this is going to help you in the future as well. So with that said, we don't want this to be a lecture. That was not our idea coming in. So I'd like some inputs, or we would like some inputs from you as well. I'm not necessarily sure how many of you are affiliated with STEM disciplines, but I think it's still worth asking in that what kind of, based on your working knowledge of intercultural competence, what topics do you think STEM students need to be familiar with? Also, additionally, what strategies would you as an instructor, I should say, as an instructor employ in your classroom to bring this about, to get your students working in teams and get your students to be culturally competent? So, any volunteers? Anybody want to share with the class, so to say?
Hey, Paul, before we start typing in the chat or maybe unmuting and contributing, there's one question in the chat. JH Lee says, could you define diverse interactions? Is it the fact that the demographics is not diverse enough, or is it the fact that there were not enough team projects?
I can try this. Aparajita, do you want to?
Yeah, I think
yeah.
I can go first. So I think diverse interaction here meant like the demographics itself is not diverse, because if you look at a typical STEM classroom, it is dominated by a particular gender and particular ethnicity. So if you're trying to create teams in a 180 student classroom, you will find that there are very few female students that you can put in the team, or there will be people from different ethnicities that you can create a diverse team. So there is a very limited interaction among the students. Like if you think like from a diverse standpoint, that's very less. And that's why we are helping students to understand those things through various modules that we introduce in the classroom and various interventions that we do.
Also, just to add to that, given that we are a land-grant institution, vast majority of our students are supposed to be in-state, and there is some homogeneity that comes with that. Some of the best interactions I've seen in class is, well, students from the Midwest interacting with students from the coast, and they're very different mindsets as to approaching interactions. There was this one profound interaction I remember witnessing in front of me where one student, small town Midwestern, or grew up in a small town in the Midwest, and she's talking about how they shovel each other's driveways in the winter, and if they bake cookies, they take it around the neighborhood. And this other student from California is just looking at them, cannot comprehend doing that. So there are some avenues there, but just the numbers are not in our favor. And we do try to work in team projects as well. There's some other questions. Yeah, some examples. Okay, can I have some concrete examples of concrete consequences outside of academia because of lack of diverse interactions? Unfortunately, they're going to be anecdotes. I don't have literature citations on hand, but in my stints in industry, I've had the opportunity to work with people from 3 different continents. Well, Australia, Europe, and America, I should say. And just in terms of work culture, it is something that's at times difficult to grasp if you don't have that perspective. So in the United States, work is paramount. You get an email, there's almost an implicit expectation that you're supposed to respond to that email ASAP, whether it's a weekend, whether you're on vacation. There's also the running joke of managers or any employees going on vacation saying, hey, if you really need me, I'll be on call. That concept does not exist in Europe or even in Australia, to my knowledge. If you're on vacation, you're on vacation. Work stays where it is, it will be there when you get back. And that sometimes ruffles some feathers. There is some disconnects that happen as well. Likewise, in terms of punctuality, I'm not necessarily a big proponent for the military approach on it in terms of, early is on time is late, and late is unacceptable. I personally do not subscribe to that. There are some ROTC students who do, and then they get wound up when other students do not seem to subscribe to that. And this kind of translates into the workplace as well. We do no longer have the luxury to say that we are only going to cater to clients within a certain city, a certain state, or even a certain country. You have to essentially meet people where they're at, know about their different cultural, tendencies and in some ways stereotypes. Aparajita and I were at a conference recently. There was a student presenting, and there was a professor from Norway in the audience. He had some very probing questions he wanted to ask, which the student was clearly ill-equipped to answer, and the student disclosed that up front too. But he just kept going. Now, for me, I know that there was no ill intent there. He wasn't out to embarrass the student. That is just the, what's the word, hard-shelled or approach that people from there generally tend to have. But there was a person sitting next to me who was not necessarily familiar with that, who was just like, well, why is he doing that? It's so rude. It's just embarrassing the student. And like, yes, it might be embarrassing, but we also need to think about where individuals are coming from. And so there is an element of, I guess, something you could call cultural intelligence or cultural IQ, so to say, that we are trying to instill in students here. So I hope that answered the question. Sorry for the ramble.
Yeah. So Paul, I think we have 2 wonderful comments in the chat.
Right. Okay. We didn't actually get to reflect and get strategy, so we'll pick on you guys later. Let's talk about the course itself. So as mentioned, I get to work with 180 first-year freshman cybersecurity students. The course itself is focused on, is set up to be a gateway course. It's an introduction to cybersecurity concepts, as well as the broader world of IT. The format is set up so that we have 2 50-minute lecture sections. Now, typically I ask for active learning classrooms, but those are few and far between on campus and very high demand, so I don't always get those. This semester I did not. I'm stuck in Math 175, and it's not a great place to do active learning things, but we make it work. And then we also have an additional 1 hour and 50-minute lab section where they are expected to apply a lot of the concepts talked about in lectures in terms of constructing software models, developing a database, and the like. A framework that we employ in this class is for this project-based learning. Students are expected to work in teams of 3 to 5 members over the course of the semester, and they will build cybersecurity and information security plans.
What? Why? Oh.
They will also develop a database, and they do not get a choice in terms of who they work with. So back to the sentiment of 95% of you will now get to choose your coworkers. I expose them to that right from the off. So they are randomly assigned to teams, team sizes of 3 to 5 members. And this is kind of what the course itself looks like. So over a 16-week semester, in week 3, I group them into teams, and I give them a little bit of an introduction into, well, what are the 5 common dysfunctions you see in a team and how you can combat that? What an unsuccessful team looks like versus what a successful team looks like. And I also have them do a reflection on teamwork following this introduction to dysfunctions of a team. That is, I ask them to talk about, in light of the 5 dysfunctions of a team that we just discussed in class, talk about a time you experienced a great instance of teamwork. Also, a time when you had a less than stellar experience of teamwork. What do you think was the root cause or causes behind that? And knowing what you do now, what would you do differently back then? So that's in week 3, fairly early in the semester. Now, in week 7, this is approaching the halfway point. This is usually around the time where conflicts start to arise. If you're familiar with the Tuckman model, this is around the time we enter the storming phase of team formation. So it's around this time that I introduce something, well, some of you may be familiar with this. It's called a Portable InterCultural module. It's a training module developed by Purdue CILMAR, and Aparajita is going to talk a little bit about it. I too will talk a little bit about it. And it's about productive conflict. I try to let them know that conflict in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing, just if it's not managed correctly or tackled effectively, that it leads to being a problem. This module is delivered in the lab sections. And there are TAs or graduate teaching assistants who we train to give those sessions. So they themselves get a little bit of an insight into what this could look like, what productive conflict could look like. And then a few weeks after that, I dedicate one class session or one lecture session for this, where I show them a TED Talk video titled Learn a New Culture, featuring a speaker named Julian Burrell, which we're actually going to view a little later. And then following that, they have a discussion board reflection as to what they took away from that. An additional portable intercultural module is also introduced. I walk them through tricky communication, mainly the intent versus impact of communication and how that can differ across cultural lines. Now, on the next slide, also to keep in mind, we actively do research in these areas in terms of looking at student reflections, their responses to surveys, and seeing, what's interesting there, what insights can we garner. And so that serves as a nice segue to our next slide, which Aparajita is going to talk about.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So since you have seen that this particular class is at the intersection of teamwork and intercultural competence, and we want these first-year students to understand these concepts better. So Paul and I, we looked through the ASU intercultural knowledge and competence rubric, and based on that, we decided that, okay, we will go ahead with these 4 criteria, and we'll try to operationalize this through the curriculum that we teach in the classroom. So in this case, like we thought that, okay, we will go ahead with openness, understanding of verbal and nonverbal communication, empathy, and cultural self-awareness. And in order to operationalize these values, we basically involve students in teamwork. So once they work with people from different backgrounds, or maybe different people, that help them to understand the verbal and nonverbal communication part, that also helps them to reflect back into their own cultures. At the same time, develop some kind of openness. In this class, the commitment of the instructor, that is Paul, and the teaching assistant. So one important thing that I want to mention here is, like, we also train the teaching assistants of this particular course on various concepts of intercultural learning. So they are trained on verbal and nonverbal communication styles. They are also trained on somewhat on empathy, handling conflicts, and even intent versus impact. So they also go through a rigorous training. And that basically equips them to answer queries of the students, or basically foster that intercultural competence environment into the classroom. Discussion boards are really important. And I will talk a little bit about when we talk about the research that we do in the classroom. So you will see that how the reflections of the students on the discussion board has helped us to understand their perceptions about working in a diverse environment. And lastly, the portable intercultural modules, as Paul has already mentioned, they are actually very important, because the modules that we use for this classroom actually helps us to cover all these 4 criteria in some way or the other. So we will discuss those in our upcoming slide. So what we are going to do now, I'm just going to give you some examples or the work that we do through this course, and give you some, so what we are going to do, we are going to watch a video that already Paul has mentioned. So this particular video is about Learn a New Culture, and it's a TED Talk by Julian. And he's a Canadian aerospace engineer, but now he lives in Norway. And his major work is to help people to communicate and connect across cultures. He has also written 3 books, and he has also done 2 important TED Talks. We'll be seeing one, which is the Learn a New Culture, where he discusses the challenges of adapting to a new culture. So I will ask Tatiana's help to play this TED Talk if possible. So Tatiana, can you please help us in having this TED Talk up on the screen? So the idea is we will watch this particular TED Talk, and then we will have a debriefing session. So we will discuss upon the major takeaways that you had. So yeah.
I had the great pleasure to live in Spain for 2 years. In Spain, when you come into a shop, you say, hola. The cashier replies, hola. And then everyone else in the shops replies, hola. It looks a little bit like this, and you feel very much welcome. I was in Spain this summer. I came back to Norway, where I live, and then I got into a grocery store. And then I said, hi, hi. Suddenly people are wondering, why is he saying hi? Because they're expecting me to start a conversation, to ask a questions. Greetings mean something different. They're much more purposeful. They're much more pragmatic. And this is one of the first things you realize when you move to a different culture. Yeah? It's the outer shelf of culture. And it's not just about greetings. It's about how you do it and when you do it. I was born and raised in a French-speaking part of Canada. And like in that part of the world, like in many other places around the world, when you leave an event or you leave a party, you're going to go around and say goodbye to everyone. So you're going to go around and shake hands with every man and kiss every woman. It's expected, it's welcome, it's part of the cultural rituals and norms. Actually, if you don't do this, you will feel a little bit uneducated. If you do this in Scandinavia, you're weird. Huh? Why would you go and disturb someone in the middle of a conversation just to say goodbye when you know you're going to see the person again, yeah? Greetings is the outer shelf of culture, and this is one of the first challenges you will meet changing culture. People like to call me the rocket scientist, which is not entirely true. I studied astrodynamic, which is a subfield of mechanical engineering, studying the rigid body motion of human-made spacecraft outside the Earth's atmosphere. Something quite different than culture and social anthropology. Yet it is through studying rocket science that I've learned about culture. When I was 20 years old, I had never been outside Canada and I could only speak French. 10 years later, I had lived in 5 different countries and learned 4 new languages. And in each of these countries, I've made a conscious effort to observe how people behaved and communicated and adapt my own behaviors and ways to communicate to these people so that they feel comfortable around me. And this is what I'm trying to do today. That's the reason I'm here today and the reason why I wake up every morning. I go around the world helping people to communicate across cultures. I help people to see the behaviors of others not based on what it means in their own culture, but based on what it means in the cultures of others. I was in the very remote region in Sichuan province in China. I was sitting in a bus in the morning and the bus was starting to drive. It was pretty empty when I sat in, but then suddenly people started to come in, and at one point it was completely full and a woman that was older than me came into the bus. Since I was born and raised in a Latin culture, my mom has always told me to leave my seat for women. And so I stood up and I indicated she could sit. And then she said no. And since I had been living in certain countries in Europe and learned that when a woman says no like this, you should just sit down in silence and look down and don't say anything, yeah? So I did that, but then something very special happened. She looked at me, she smiled. And then she sat on me. But not only did she sit on me, in that part of China, people don't have hair on their arms. So she was sitting on me, pulling my hair, and laughing about it with everyone else in the bus. Yeah, as you can imagine, this did not feel very comfortable for me, but it seemed to be quite comfortable for her because she sat there for half an hour, yeah? And everyone was laughing, so I thought, okay, Julian, just try to enjoy the moment. And so I started to laugh with them, and you know, it was a long bus drive, and what that meant was that two families felt very comfortable, and they ended up inviting me for dinner that night when we arrived to the village, and I ended up to stay over a couple of nights at one of the family. Because I've managed to put myself in a situation that was uncomfortable for me and become comfortable so the locals felt that they were much closer than me. And this is what we're trying to do when we learn a new culture. This is about learning to be comfortable in what is uncomfortable. How is it possible that it is more comfortable for a Chinese woman to sit on a stranger than it is for us to sit next to someone that we've been commuting with for years but never talked to? Personal space is very cultural. Yeah? But what is culture? Culture is our mental programming. This is our mental programming that tells us what is good behaviors or bad behaviors, wanted or unwanted behaviors, what we should do or don't do, what is welcome and not welcome. And now I'm not just talking about national cultures. We also have subculture. It could be an organizational culture, the culture you have within a company or an organization. Or it could be also different culture in different social economic group within the same society. And all of these groups, all of these cultures have rituals and have norms that we need to respect. And if you want to feel part of that group, you need to adapt your own behaviors to that one group. There's the outer shelf of culture, and there's also the inner shelf of culture. The outer shelf is everything we can see, the nonverbal, the verbal. The inner shelf is more the values, the logic of socialization, how we understand in a deeper way the cultures we're interacting with. I was invited to a wedding in Switzerland, and it was a Swiss-German girl that was marrying a Lebanese man. And when I came into the church, the two families were sitting there. On the one side was the Swiss-German family. They were all sitting in silence, looking straight, waiting for the ceremony to start. On the other side was the Lebanese family. Before the ceremony even started, the women were crying. The men were talking loudly. The kids were running around. It looked a little bit like this. If you've been to a multicultural wedding, you may relate quite easily. You could feel the cultural tension, the cultural differences. Actually, in the middle of the ceremony, when the man kneeled down to put the ring in his wife's finger, 3 people from the Lebanese side jumped on stage to take a picture of the man kneeling down, to the great despair of the Swiss-German well-behaved family. But luckily that evening, the Lebanese people had brought musical instruments, and while they started to play, the Swiss Germans started to drink. And within a few hours, the Swiss Germans were dancing on the table on the Lebanese beach. Yeah, and they've been dancing there up until 4 o'clock the next morning. And both families live happily since then. And now this is what we try to do to bridge culture. We try to find these musical instruments that will make people jump on table and dance on table. We need to try to find these tools that make people understand the world and connect despite the cultural differences. And this is a lot about emotion. If you come from a culture where the emotion is very obvious, when you meet someone and you're very happy, you're showing it to the person. You're showing you're very happy, maybe you're going to hug the person, you're showing it very clearly. If you're angry, you're going to do the same. You're going to show that you're angry, and the person will see it very clearly. So if you come from a culture like this and you move into a culture where emotions are much more subtle, and you try to interpret the behaviors of others, it may look something like this for you. So you see that maybe the person studied astrodynamic, which is a...
Is it okay?
you.
Pause? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tatiana. Paul, can you have the slide up? Okay, so yeah, Paul, I think you need to share your screen again. Yeah. So due to the brevity of this time, we could not watch the entire video, but we actually watched a large chunk of it. So I just wanted to, understand what are the major takeaway or the messages that you got from this TED Talk that Julian was telling. So is it like, how does understanding of different culture impact your personal or professional life? So we have a few questions, so feel free to pick up any one of them, and please feel free to unmute yourself and talk about it. That would be great. Or please feel free to use the chat, whatever you think is best.
Is it okay? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so I wanted to touch based on him saying having to feel uncomfortable to make others feel comfortable. So
Right.
if they have different culture, he's saying that they're having different goals, right? So in making multicultural teams doesn't mean that. So we have to persuade, if we want to persuade the team members that you guys have to sacrifice your comfort zone to make others feel comfortable, doesn't mean that we have to make some kind of new culture, or because we have to persuade based on, hey guys, you guys have the same goal. And because goals are deeply tied into, culture, right? So it doesn't mean
Right.
that we have to make our own team culture. And how does that work?
Right. I think that's a great question. And what I feel is that when you work in a team, you actually create a culture, because when you start interacting with others in your team, you actually start putting your own rules, and that actually sets your cultural boundary. And you learn from one another. For example, let's say I come from a country which uses a very indirect tone of communication, right? Like saying a flat no or a flat yes is not acceptable in my culture. And when I work here and I work with people who has a very direct tone of communication. So you basically, once you start working, you gradually develop and you understand people, because this is something like, I think this is a quality of being human, that you basically understand others, and we are cognitively pretty sound in that. So that helps us to understand others' behavior and change our behaviors accordingly, because to be honest, we all want to be adaptable at one point of time. And that's how you basically set these goals when you work in a team environment, and you set your own culture, which you can call it a team culture if you want to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so we have some comments. Yeah, thank you, Annette, for sharing the activity. Anyone else who wants to share their thoughts? Okay, so thank you, Leslie, for sharing your thought on the chat. Okay, so we can move on to the next part of our presentation. So we also introduce students to some of the games that we do in the classroom, because they all are freshman students. Everything that we do here is new to them. Even the video that you saw is completely new to them, because some of the students have been in Indiana only, and they have not got opportunity to travel so much. So doing these kind of exercises actually helps them to think through the process. So we also do an activity which is known as the survival activity, and we are going to do that with all of you. So we are going to divide you all into groups, and you will be assigned a breakout room. And the scenario here is like you and your team member were in a plane crash and you landed on an ocean. And there is just one lifeboat that you can take to a deserted island, but you can just take 12 items with you on the boat. So as a group, you have to decide which items to bring along. You will be given 7 minutes to make your decisions. Make a note of the items that you are planning to take with you. And also feel free to justify why you think those items are important. And there is one important note. Try to imagine that you come from different countries and you belong from different ethnicities. So maybe try to reflect that how coming from different countries actually affect your decision making in this case. Right. So Tatiana, will you please help us to divide people into breakout rooms?
And in the interest of time, we'll probably be looking at 5 minutes instead of 7.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes. Think about the question. You were in a plane crash, landed in the ocean. You have one lifeboat, and you have to agree upon 12 items to bring along. The rooms are now open. So just click join. And we have 5 minutes to discuss.
I think everybody is back. Okay, so how was the activity? What did you learn from that activity? Any thoughts? Thank you, Leslie.
Hello. Okay.
Hi.
Okay, great. I think what I learned from these breakouts is the fact that you brainstorm and you listen to other people's idea, you share from other people's thoughts. You try to reason together, because that was what we did in group 5. And we tried to, before we agreed together as a team on one point, not diversifying, as in we have the same goal, the same focus on the same thing. It really helped us for good. And we're able to achieve our 12 items.
Yeah. So did you imagine yourself coming from different countries? Did that impact your decision making in some way?
Yes, it does.
Can you talk about this about that?
Okay, because what happened was that somebody made mention of the fact that we should include knife as part of the item. And you're like, we try to look from the angle. Are we looking at safety, or are we looking at what is the function of the knife? Okay, now we're like, from the culture view, knife could be that, if you get a fish, we need to cut it, probably cook the fish as a meal for the team and something like that. So it really helped in decision making.
Sure. Yeah, I think, that's a good point. And even like we had a conversation regarding the culture, and I thought that, since I come from India and I'm a Hindu, I thought that, I'll take a Ganesha with me, because God is important. If I get lost in that particular island, I need somebody to pray to. So I thought that, and same things came up in my group. So yeah. I think, it's important, like when you start imagining yourself from different culture, and if we play this activity for a longer time, you will see and also one thing that happened in our group, we exceeded 12 items we were almost 13 or 14 items by the time we ended our conversation. So I think those things keep happening. If you play this game for a longer time, you will see that there will be a lot of negotiations. And it also illustrates, like, when students play this game, this helps them to develop decision-making skills, at the same time think about the culture, and also develop negotiation skills, because we want them to have those things. And also they engage in a kind of a productive conflict, because they actually want to tell, like, okay, this is important to them, and they try to justify it. So in some ways, like, this helps them to think through think from the aspect of teamwork, at the same time learn about other cultures. Okay, so
just one thing to add, which I experienced in my group. So goes along what Leslie said in the chat, in that culture didn't really come up explicitly. Perhaps it was there implicitly. We were mainly focused on how we're going to survive. And we're pretty much all in lockstep until the topic of glasses came up. And my own bias was, oh yeah, we need glasses, drink water, all of that. And then Elena was like, no, glasses to see things. And suddenly half our group needed glasses, other half did not. And so that was a little bit of conflict there. So, but it was interesting, nevertheless, to hear from different people how culture can play a role, or survival might supersede everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So maybe Paul, if you want, you can just go ahead with the research part of it.
Sure. So we're also gonna, as mentioned, we did do some research over the different interventions introduced in this class. So we're going to present the results from 3 studies, as well as what we did as part of these studies. So the first one, this is what we presented most recently at the Frontiers in Engineering conference in Texas. So the portable intercultural modules, or PIMs, if you're interested, I believe someone put a link in the chat as well. Otherwise, feel free to scan the QR code. It will take you right to the website. So I introduced 2 PIMs as part of this course. They're completely online, asynchronous. They consist of a sequence of videos, activities, readings, quizzes that students respond to, as well as a reflection. And these are self-paced. Generally, I give my students like a week to work on these whenever they're introduced. And we'll talk about these in a little bit more detail. So the productive conflict PIMS focuses on, as one would imagine, conflict management, the notion of trust and psychological safety, as well as bridging differences. So we introduced them into to the notions of different styles of conflict management. You might have somewhat an engaging style or an avoidance style, or an accommodating style, which may not always be the most conducive towards resolving conflict. We talk about the notion of trust, how some of it might be implicit, some of it might be calculus-based, in that you're working out some math in your head in terms of, okay, trusting this person, the benefits outweigh the potential downsides, so I'm going to do this. Or it might be a case of, hey, this person has established themselves as an expert, so I'm going to trust them. And then, of course, bridging differences, in that the reality that, well, we're all human. We all have different ways of communicating. We all have different ways of thinking about communications. And also the danger of anecdotes or examples. Just because you had one less than favorable interaction with an individual from a certain country, a certain state, a certain ethnicity, that just should not reflect on that entire country, state, ethnicity at all. That is one data point. Yes, let it inform you, but do not extrapolate from that. And also the PIMS introduces different aspects of how you can manage emotions pertaining to conflict. All of this plays into a capstone reflection, and I'll put the reflection up on the next slide. So it's a lot to read in a short span of time. So the text is in black and gold, our Purdue branding and Purdue colors up there. One thing I'd like to focus on are the 4 names on line 1. Jeevan, Alicia, Bayou, and Robert. Now, based on your preconceived notions, based on your experiences of various cultures, you would have subconsciously assigned nationalities, ethnicities, genders to these individuals. That's not a bad thing. I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to criminalize it. No, that's what we do. That's what we do as humans. Now, when you hear the name Robert, I wouldn't blame you for thinking of a white male named Robert. But does that have to be the case? No. Which is why I opened this session saying, hey, my actual name's Paul Thomas. Not what you'd expect, but that's the case. So students have to kind of reflect on what are they coming into this capstone with. Yes, they saw a bunch of videos, they read a bunch of things, but what are they coming into this with? And it's situated in the context of a senior design project, and they're developing a website, so very much in the realm of IT. And the team, well, they're experiencing some dysfunction. Their project is not going as planned. It's not gone as far as possible. And the team is considering different ways in which they can resolve this. And even that's not going well. So after that, we asked the team to reflect on this. Why are things going wrong in this team? If you were in this team, what would you do to resolve this? And also to remove themselves from their own shoes, from their own biases, and think about how a different team member might approach this. So these were evaluated. Were these the ASE rubrics?
No, that's a different rubric, but it's in the hub.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and this is level 4 of that rubric. This is the highest level of openness, orientation, empathy, and ambiguity tolerance that you can see. And it's operationalized there as well. So ideally, we would want to see a high degree of openness, empathy, the willingness to learn new things, and the willingness to tolerate ambiguity, the reality that life is not black or white, and neither is culture. So our results, okay. So what we ended up doing was, of course, coding the reflections on the 4-point scale, and we did some hierarchical clustering, which revealed the existence of two clusters. One, the scores were between 2 and 3, or a high 1 to 3, and the other, pretty much on every aspect, was between 3 and 4. This was interesting. So essentially, among my student body, there was essentially a cluster of students who were incredibly open to cultures, exhibit a high degree of ambiguity. They are willing and able to learn about new things. And then there's a group that's less inclined to that. And so these are some of the quotes we got from either cluster as well. Some were rather pessimistic in that, yeah, this team's done. We're never getting out of it. It's just chaos. There's no point. And others were more, well, proactive. They were focusing on inclusivity. They are acknowledging the reality of different lived experiences and how to cater to those lived experiences as well, and trying to incorporate every bit of feedback that they can from different team members. Now, of course, this is a snapshot of what was presented in the paper itself, but I'd be happy to share that with you if you'd like.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I can take over the second study. So this particular study is a part of a conference proceeding that went to ICERI, and it focused on cultivating global mindset for the students. So in this study, we basically use the other PIM, which is the tricky communication PIM. So Paul, if you want, you can just change the slide. Okay, so the tricky communication PIM was focused on intent of the communication and its impact. And this particular PIM was divided into 5 submodules. The first submodule focused on platinum rule and the concept of law of positive intention. Then the other modules focused on oral communication, nonverbal communication, and written communication, because you can imagine that the way you communicate can have a different impact on a person, because if you don't understand what is being communicated, it can be perceived differently. For example, if you have a very direct tone of communication and talking to a person who has an indirect tone of communication, in that case, you might be perceived rude. So those kind of instances happen, and like the students were like basically helped to understand these kind of things through this particular module, and they were also in the end allowed to think of the strategies that align to intent and impact. So upon completion of these submodules, students completed a capstone reflection as they did in the other PIM. So one thing that is important about the PIMs is like every PIM ends with a capstone reflection, and that helps you to analyze that what are the learning gains, the intercultural learning gains what are the intercultural learning gains from that particular PIM for the student group. So in this capstone, I'm going to introduce you to the two characters. So the story here is like there was a girl, her name was Amishi. She was Indian American. She spoke 2 languages, Bengali at home and English at school. There was another person, Melissa, who was a white American. She learned Spanish in her junior high for 2 years, but she only speaks English. The commonality among these two characters are they grew up in the suburb of the same Midwestern city, but they have never met. So this is the first time they are meeting at the college, and they are assigned as lab partners in a chemistry classroom. So now we will focus on the conversation that they had. So Melissa, she starts the conversation by introducing herself, and she says that she expects that the lab in the college is as good as that she had back in her high school. And she also asks a question to Amishi. She asked that, do you even get a chance to do labs from where you are from? Because she is not sure where is Amishi from. So Amishi enthusiastically replies, of course. And then she elaborates on that she also got to do labs every week. And there was a college nearby where she visited. And she also saw that how people work on human cadavers. Similarly, like on listening Amishi's note, Melissa complimented her. Like she wanted to compliment her, stating that your English is so good, you don't have an accent, and where did you learn it? So this particular comment made Amishi a little upset, and she did not respond to her. Melissa did understand that something went wrong, but she was not sure. So this was a scenario which was showed to the students, and they were asked to write a reflection in 250 to 300 words based on certain questions. So the questions were like, what does each person intend? So what was the intention of each person? What was the impact? What strategies can Amishi and Melissa use in the moment to move through the situation? And what strategy can Melissa use in future to avoid similar situations? So this reflection was very important to us. We actually qualitatively coded this reflection. We performed inductive thematic analysis, and we came up with certain themes. So you can see that we had themes for empathy, understanding of verbal and nonverbal communication, microaggression, and understanding others' perspectives. So basically for empathy, students were able to understand the attitude and perception, like they were able to empathize with Amishi in that particular situation. As one of the students said that, I can understand how Amishi felt. She did not have a response to what Melissa said because she could have possibly felt upset or attacked. So you can see from the student codes their perception about this particular situation. Similarly, for us, they were able to understand the verbal and nonverbal communication aspect in this particular scenario. Like some of the students perceived Melissa as rude, whereas like some of the students also reflected that the nonverbal communication, that Amishi suddenly being silent also signifies that she was upset from that particular situation, even though that was not explicitly written in the scenario. So students were able to perceive that. Students were also able to recognize instances of microaggression, because one of the students explicitly wrote that there was an instance of microaggression as Melissa assumes that Amishi is not originally from United States and assumes that English is not her first language. So students reflected on those things. And finally, the good part is like, the best part that we saw here is like students were just not critiques. So they also saw a positive outlook to the problem. They were able to bridge that particular difference. So they basically showed the capability to embrace and adopt a broader perspective, being more receptive to different viewpoints, because they were asked to think of strategies to bridge that particular gap. And one of the students wrote that Melissa did not intend to offend Amishi. I believe this could be fixed if Melissa and Amishi can discuss each other's feeling and point of view of the situation and how they can move forward in the future interaction. So our goal is just not to help students to become critiques, rather than helping them to think through the situation and find out a strategy. And that we saw through this particular study that we did. So Now, this is a third research work, which is currently work in progress, and we plan to submit it in an upcoming conference. So basically, as already Paul has mentioned that the Julian's video that we saw a few minutes back, the TED Talk, and that is an important part of one of the sessions that Paul does with his students. So in that particular case, so Paul conducts a session, then they watch this video. They also do some readings on intent versus impact, and there's a discussion board where they are asked these 3 questions like, why it is important to learn about cultures? What new information did you gain from Julian's talk or readings and how it applies to you? And how does message in this talk or reading apply to a regular interaction that you have with students and peers in the classroom or on campus? So basically what we did, we basically again did qualitative coding. We analyzed these discussion posts qualitatively. And in the next slide, I can show you the themes that came out. So the broader theme that emerged was learning about cultures is important. So students felt that learning about cultures is important, and there were 3 sub-themes. The reasons were to avoid miscommunication, to show respect and care, and finally to develop empathy, openness, and become more tolerant. For the second broader theme that emerged was learning about culture helps us to understand my team better, which was really a very good quote, because to be very explicit, this particular assignment is done in the week 10 of the class, and this actually shows that what we were trying to build in the students, that is to understand the importance of culture in the teamwork, that is showcased through this theme, through this theme. And you can see the sub themes for that is like, one of the students mentioned that I come outside the Midwest. It helps me to understand the quirks of the Midwest. The other theme that emerged was it helped me to learn about communication styles of my teammates. And some of the students also mentioned that I avoided asking question in group as it is not in my culture, but now I feel confident. So these themes also are very encouraging to us as a researcher and Paul as an instructor, because this helps us to understand that, okay, whatever we are doing is getting, absorbed in some way by the students through our work that we are doing in the classroom. Yeah. So, Paul, you might.
So yeah, that basically brings us up to the end of this session. And the idea is that integrating intercultural competence concepts in your classroom, it can help students who may be arriving with a less than stellar competence level to develop an understanding of their own culture as well as other culture. And they were able to develop or brainstorm approaches and strategies they can use to bridge these gaps. But it is not without a cost. It does take time and effort to integrate these things in a manner that makes sense, and also to demonstrate the utility of it to your students. Because anecdotally, I can tell you, whenever I mention things pertaining to teamwork and intercultural competence, you can see the eyes rolling in maybe 20% of the classroom right away. And those are probably the students that need it the most. They just don't recognize it. So to emphasize that, technical stuff, we're good at that. We really are. We're good at teaching it. For the most part, the students are good at learning it. They are very competent overall, even in terms of grades and GPAs and whatnot. And not to say that's not difficult. It can be. But people, that's not negotiable. They are going to be there everywhere. And as such, if you are better equipped to work with those that are different from you, you're more likely to be very successful in your career going forward. I think there's one last announcement with regard to...
So I have an announcement. Since I'm an intercultural research specialist for CILMAR, I manage the seed grant. So this year, like the seed grant for the next year, 2024, the call for application is open. If you want, you can just go ahead, scan this QR code, and these are some of the details. So the award budget is up to 5,000. The award period is between fall 2024 to spring 2025. There is a proposal template this time. So if you go to the website and you scroll down, you will find a link to the proposal template. So go ahead, you can use that. That's a fillable PDF, so feel free to use that. And then there's a Qualtrics link, so you have to submit everything through that particular link. If you need more information, please reach out to me. The deadline is March 1st, 2024, but you can start thinking about it now. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach me out. And the awards will be announced in the first week of April in 2024. So that's all from our side. Thank you so much. Let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much. Excellent, rich presentation with a lot of examples and engaging activities, which I assume are all in the Hubble. And yes, so if anybody has a question or a comment, we still have some time. So JH has a question, where could I get the methods of how you clustered the data?
Right. So our proceedings of FIE conference will be out very soon. The conference was last week in Texas. So I assume like in a month or so, the proceedings will be out. So that will help you to understand the methods very well, because we have a proper, so we did not go into the detail of the quantitative analysis that we did. So maybe that would be helpful. And if you want, just reach out to me. I'll be happy to share with you the proceedings once I get that. Yeah.
Oh, I was kind of expecting this question. It was going to happen at some point. Okay, are there suggestions for changing the PIM given your experience with them? I don't know. I don't feel like I'm qualified to comment on that necessarily, but I feel like they worked pretty well in the context of my classroom. Although, and with also the capstones, there are a few options in terms of scenarios. So I picked the one that was most applicable or most relatable for students in my discipline. However, I can see that, well, there were like 3 scenarios, and I can definitely see that not being necessarily applicable for certain disciplines, like even within the Polytechnic. Like if I were doing a construction management class, none of those would in any way, shape, or form be remotely relatable for students there. But I think on the whole, it was really useful. If I were to nitpick, it would be that. And I guess an added suggestion would be that the asynchronous modules are great, but at least in the past year and a half, I've seen students wanting to attend classes more, especially among freshmen. So if there are more guided trainer sessions, I think that would be really helpful as well. To supplement the PIMs, not in lieu of them, or to provide more context for what they're going to encounter in the PIMs.
Do we have another question? It's a thank you from Alisa.
I have a question about the teamwork. Do you feel like you've seen a noticeable or measurable increase in the quality of the teamwork, or maybe a reduction in conflict? And kind of a related question, like, do you think students are aware of it, or is it a case where like you're when you make it work better, they don't see the value of it because you've done all this work to design it, think about it, and so if that makes sense.
I would say it's a little bit of column B and column C, to be perfectly honest, in that since doing this, I've had a well, I shouldn't say significantly, since I don't have a before after data points, but anecdotally at least, the number of students coming to me or emailing me about team conflicts have reduced. That used to be, especially halfway point of the semester, used to be several emails in the class of that size. Now it's maybe 1 or 2 instances throughout the whole semester, and usually there's some extenuating circumstance associated with it. With that said, I think the last bit that you mentioned also plays into this, in that, well, if we just bake it into the experience, the student's not necessarily aware of or consciously aware of how this is playing into how they conduct themselves. So I don't know if I'll ever get the opportunity to split my class in, say 90 in one section, 90 in another, and then we can really do an A/B study and see what's going on, right? But anecdotally, it has helped. The number of instances of team-related troubles that me or my TAs have to deal with have gone down. And also, again, anecdotally, some students have come up and been like, thank you so much for sharing this. I wish someone had shown me this in high school. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Does anybody else have a question or a comment?
I'll just say it might be interesting to add some affective questions, you know, to in the future in some way to understand student perception of what they learn about teamwork. And even I'm guessing you could do something sort of throughout your curriculum to see or compare with other curriculum within PPI to see if this really shifts, especially between their first year and senior year, if it seems like they continue to apply some of what they learned, and if there's, you know, down the road, some kind of positive outcome.
You bring up a good point, and I don't know if it's the Office of Globalization I should talk to about that with regard to, because I honestly, within my department, I have a pretty good idea that, yeah, basically it's just me doing this and trying to get them in early, right? But with regard to the wider college, I have no clue whatsoever what's going on. I know we do study abroads, and those are offered across a bunch of programs, but I do not know what happens with, and the Tech 330 class, I suppose. But that is the extent to which I know what's going on. I think that'd be great to explore.
Yeah.
Can I follow up on that just with the, because I'm interested in this topic and what you're doing. So like you said, you have these students who say like, I wish I'd learned this before. Do you have like a pre-measure of like their knowledge and skills, their ability to work in teams? Because you also don't, I mean, if students are also like equipped to work in diverse teams, then this could like
right
be below their competence, and then it feels like, I mean, this is the thing that, you know, you're always trying to make it just hard enough where it's challenging, but you don't want to overdo it and like freak them out.
So you bring up a good point. That
Undershoot.
none of the studies we've done were in any way, shape, or form pre-post. It's not like the intervention caused this competence levels that we're seeing. And we were very careful to word it that way too, that that's not what's happening here. It's and also given that it's a freshman class, I couldn't necessarily think of a good point to measure these self-perceptions. And then the self-perceptions also have this issue of, you know, no one's the villain in their own story. No one's ever going to want to admit that, hey, I suck at working in teams. I play enough video games to know that it's never my fault. It's always my team's fault that I don't win, right? So that was also a pragmatic issue that we thought about, and it just could not think of a reliable way or a valid way to measure that. Because I can't think of anyone ever wanting to say that, no, I do not have, maybe there might be, maybe I'm wrong. So that was something that came up. But you do bring up a good point in that we don't know how much of this is students coming in are already just, you know, equipped to work in multicultural settings. But one redeeming trait was the two clusters that we found were about evenly sized, right, Aparajita?
Yeah, almost. Yeah.
So you could say about half the class was 3 to 4 in terms of, on a 4-point scale, in terms of openness, empathy, tolerance to ambiguity, and all of that. And the other half was 1.8 to 3, so less so. But we just can't attribute whether well, the 3 and 4s we're seeing is because of the training versus they were always that way.
Yeah. And one thing we've done that this is not for research, this is more just for within the classroom setting, but like you're saying, it's in terms of face validity to the students that this is a worthwhile activity, even something as simple kind of like them writing down like kind of pre-post, right? Here's what I know about teamwork, and then that reflection, because we've had that, like we often have students I work with international students, the language, so we'll have them in the first week do an introduction video. Pretty simple, record it, then they watch it 15 weeks later. And it's really funny, but it's to us about how, I guess, kind of they're criticizing themselves, but they're able to say, look how much I grew, how simple I was back then, how basic. So even, I don't know, for research purposes, you could maybe code it or something, but in terms of just, because like you're saying, even if you're the only team working on the teamwork, I mean, this is what I say is like, we may be the only class where you work on this, but I know you're doing teamwork in every other class. So there's many chances to practice it. So there might be like, you might be surprised. I know I often am surprised just by asking them to tell us like, what have you learned? Because they're out doing it. So they might be taking these little things that you did and like the effects might be bigger. I don't know, but it might be worth even just asking.
I mean, that's a good idea. I do tell them that, look, I will never lay claim to you are successful in your career because of this one class you took with me. I just can't do that. There's this one among 5 or 6 classes they're taking just this semester times 8 semesters or however long they're here. But I hope that something you take away from this can be applicable elsewhere. But I like the idea. Maybe week 1 of the semester, I do have them do introduction posts. Could add a prompt in there about I don't know.
But even anecdotally, like the stories you told, like that stuff, it has limited research value, but in terms of like an internship or an interview setting, tell me about a time you worked successfully on a team, like having those stories where they consolidated it, you've given them a good setting, they practiced it. And then that kind of
so they do already do that, but it's not a video. It's just a discussion post where I asked.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a video, but
it's a discussion post where I asked them really, okay, hey, given all this, we've talked about what effective teams look like, ineffective teams look like. I want to hear from you. Tell me about a time when you had great teamwork going on. Tell me about a time when you had less than stellar teamwork going on. Now the great stuff, that's good. But what would you do differently about the less than stellar experience, knowing what you know now? But I suppose that's worth doing maybe at the end of the semester too, in that I could just split that activity off for the end of the semester.
Right.
Perhaps.
Matt?
Yeah.
I don't know if we have time or not.
We have 2 minutes.
What I was thinking is maybe we could do a control group for what Matt does with international students in order to, I don't know, maybe balance out participants. So we could look at US or even Midwestern students trying to do the same for another culture, like trying to ease up into another culture. And maybe given the restrictions that we have here, it could be done with language classes if we teamed up with someone in SLC and see how the same methodologies could apply to, let's say, I don't know, first years or French 101 or, I don't know, Japanese 101, and how would they do that video in Japanese at the beginning of the year, of the semester, and then how they would evolve by the end of the semester. Maybe not with 101 because they don't know enough, but the equivalent level of language that our international students come here with English.
You'd also get a wider, I guess, representation of students. It's not just STEM students or liberal arts. You'd get the entire university with that too.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will say most of my students are STEM students. That's why they but that's fine.
Languages also have a significant portion of STEM students actually, especially I think at a higher level with double majors and degree pluses, and I mean not Not as prevalent as in your classes, of course, but there's a good chunk of them.
Okay.
I just think that the teamwork and intercultural stuff is a really interesting combination, and I think it's very powerful because there are real stakes involved, like their grades. And so I think it's not, I mean, we can do these little exercises, kind of scaffolding or whatnot, but that's one of the things that, you know, I see with students where why group work is kind of such a big deal is like you have to work with somebody who's different and your grade is attached. So I think it's an interesting place it's an important place to work on it. So I think that's great that you're doing it.
Yeah, and I do emphasize that their team project, let's see, it makes up 15% of their grades. So the inability to work effectively with your team can cost you an A. You won't fail the class, but the other thing I institute is also peer evaluations, which is worth 5% of their grade. So effectively 20% of their grade comes from working in a team and working well in a team. So no, you bring up a great point. And sorry, Elaine, I interrupted.
No, I thought that that would be incentive enough, the grade. But what I have seen is resentment, because I am always right. I'm on the right always. And so I have all these teammates that cannot do well for the life of them. And so all I have is resentment because they are lowering my grade. So there is no effort. That's what I'm coming to these sessions, right? I need to learn how to get them into understanding how teams work and how they have to invest.
Yeah, and Elaine, I would say that is generally, in my experience,
personally,
that's what I see too. Is not that they embrace teamwork, is that they really don't like it because of that. Because it usually,
and to me, that's an acceptable outcome. You don't have to like it, but I also tell them the reality is that if you think just because there's money on the table that suddenly everyone you ever work with is going to be 100% bought in, doing the best work all the time, oh, you have a rude awakening coming for you down the road. This is not something that you leave behind in high school or college. So,
Elaine, you can, if you, this is kind of by the side, but if you want, one of the things I do is I work with strengths, like Clifton strengths. And I'm supposed to give a set number of workshops. So if you want to drop me a line, that can be an interesting way. Like people are different in lots of different ways, and including their talents. And so that's one of the areas where people drive each other crazy. So I'm like a big picture, not detail oriented person. And when I work with super detailed oriented people, we drive each other crazy. So I think there are lots of reasons why teams can fail: culture, personality, talents, lots of them.
But even be aware of those things. I think that being aware of those things would go a long way. And I'm still not, I mean, I recognize the work that you have done, but I still don't know how I would implement that in my class. Halfway through, like maybe I'm thinking after listening to you, maybe now it would be a good moment because now I'm switching teams. And so what was the experience with the teams before? What is the experience with the teams now? If I do one activity like that of raising awareness about what it means to work in teams. And I always think that should come from outside of me because I'm always a suspect, right? Since I'm the one imposing the activity, I'm going to have some agenda, hidden agenda there.
oh no, I expect you to work in teams.
Yes.
So evil.
These foreigners with an accent, they insist in working in teams. That must be because of something.
I don't want to keep us too long, but I'll jump in here with a couple thoughts. Elena, I think it would be great if you got Matt in there doing something on strengths and foregrounding teams. And also, I'm willing to work with you on a syllabus for the future to think about where to bring in foregrounding the importance of teamwork. And that circles back to something that actually came out of the Polytechnic. There was a faculty member last year who reached out to CILMAR through somebody because he felt that students were graduating, especially some international students, with all the tech skills, and they devalued teamwork from the get-go and all the interpersonal skills. And he felt like they weren't going to get jobs. He couldn't write letters of support, right? Because they didn't have the skills, but he hadn't thought about, well, how do I foreground it and convince them of the importance of this, right? And Paul, what I think you're doing by doing this in a first year class right up front and foregrounding the fact that teamwork matters, putting it in the grade, you know, the meta discussions.
Mhm.
I think all that is going to shape the students' understanding of what is expected down the road and in their field. And I think that is crucial. Wish all first year STEM courses would do that in some way, because really it's across the board in STEM.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying that. That was really affirming to hear. And it's kind of the goal too. This is not to beat on my peers, but this is an honest assessment. Most of them would not touch a freshman class with a 10-foot pole, even if they had a gun to their head. And I understand it. Believe me, I understand it. You do not want to deal with 17 to 19-year-olds, first time away from home, first time staying in a dorm, having to actually take care of themselves, and all the drama and issues that come with it. And sometimes in a new country, throw that in there and it's a whole can of worms. And, you know, some of my colleagues have said, you know, Paul, we see a lot more utility for you in upper division classes. I'm like, thank you, I guess. But here's the thing. Someone needs to set up these students to be successful in those classes. Otherwise, you're just kicking the can down the road. So, but anyway, I think we're well over time at this point, but the discussions are great. I mean, happy to talk about this further with any of you if you have any questions or suggestions or research ideas. I think I speak for both of us here, and I say that we'd be open to that.
Well, we should connect, Paul, because actually, like our target population is who you just described, first year international students who are trying to figure it all out. So it's really important to us to keep it interesting so that we can keep doing that year after year. And we might actually have a fair amount of overlap even in the students we're teaching. So that'd be good.
Absolutely, yeah.
I connect with Letha and CILMAR periodically. So yeah, we should probably connect because we might have some resources and some overlaps that could be useful.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and I will be very happy to collaborate on any research opportunity because I do that. So yeah, and Paula and I have been.
I would love to capture more.
Absolutely, yeah. That's
similar to what you guys are doing. So thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Look at you all teaming up.
All
right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Tatiana.